Desperate and trembling, a boy says the accusation is false and that he didn't do anything. However, the old man declares that the accused has no right to speak to him. At that moment, he orders his guards to take the boy away, but the boy keeps shouting that he was falsely accused. Still desperate, he screams for them not to ruin him. This is the city of Katarov, the city where the protagonist was born and raised. It is a place famous for its S-class dungeon known as the Dungeon of Katarov. This is the reason why many adventurers come to the city to conquer the dungeon, leaving it crowded. So in this very place, the protagonist was merely a farmer. Looking carefully ahead, he notices that the fields are being destroyed. Suddenly, a man named Dalda arrives at the scene, being the son of the city's chief. Approaching with a strange smile, the bully says his father told him the protagonist's annual contribution was low again. Nervous, the boy realizes it was these men who destroyed the fields. It is explained that, in fact, the boy is an ox, and he lowers his head and apologizes to the bullies. People with dull silver hair like his are called ox, and there is a history of persecution against people like him. In this story, it is said that once the ox betrayed humans and helped the demons. Even if they beat you, even if they destroy your fields for no reason. Unfortunately, the boy's only choice is to endure it all. After the beating, he returns to the city center. A girl appears in front of him, saying that Dalda and his friends beat him again. This is Namia, who says she will take care of him. Namia is the daughter of a neighboring farmer and is also his only friend in the city. After finishing the bandaging, the protagonist thanks her, and the concerned girl asks why they keep bothering him. With a sad look, he says there's nothing he can do and blames it on his silver hair. A bit embarrassed, his friend explains that she really likes his hair color. At this, the boy thinks that to him his silver hair is a curse, but Namia always says such things. Changing the subject, she catches Kiska's attention, announcing that she's going to marry Dalda. This news completely shocks the hero, leaving him speechless. Smiling falsely, he says he understands and congratulates her. Hearing this, the girl also looks surprised. A bit uncomfortable, she asks Kiska if this seems okay to him. She then asks him if he plans to stay in this city forever, and he replies that maybe he will. Worried, she warns him that she doesn't like the villagers fighting with him, and that if he stays here, he might end up dead. Awkwardly, he says he can't help it. Suddenly, the girl grabs his arm. Afraid, she says they should run away together from this city. This new revelation leaves the protagonist speechless. She explains that she has money at home, and with it, they can find a place to live together where no one knows them. The boy asks if she really wants this, and she says yes. She affirms that she doesn't want to marry that guy. Then the blonde catches his friend's attention. Approaching, he kisses her and says he loves her, and she responds by saying she loves him too. Later that night, in the same village, the hero is carrying some kind of sack on his back. Smiling, he knows that tonight he and Nami will leave this city of Katarov. Excited, he thinks that with Nami, he will forget the horrible days they lived in this city. The boy then heads toward his friend's house. Suddenly, he begins to hear her voice screaming for them to stop. Worried, he realizes it's her voice and rushes into the house. Desperate, he runs toward her room, calling her name. Opening the door, he finds her in bed with the 3 bullies. The only thing the protagonist can say is her name. Irritated, Dalda calls the boy an ox and asks what he's doing there. Perplexed, Kiska questions what's going on. Then the bully remarks that it should be obvious just by looking. Looking to the side, he sees his girl completely turned away. Then he orders the bully to leave now. Uncertain, he punches the bully in the face, demanding he get away from her. Even more irritated, the bully punches him in the stomach. He finishes him off with a knee strike. At that moment, they all pounce on him and start beating him. In the background, Nami begs them to stop, and one of the men asks what the boy wants. Asking what he means, he claims Nami is his wife. Then he looks at one of his friends as they had an idea. One of the bullies presses the boy against the wall while the other grabs his arm. In a somewhat delicate manner, he starts pulling at his nail. And then with immense brutality, he rips it out. After feeling such intense pain, the protagonist begins to scream. Smiling, the bully says, "One more." They continue torturing the boy, but Nami intervenes to make them stop. Announcing that she will speak, she gently begs them to stop doing this. Desperate, the hero tells Nami to stop, but then the bully punches him in the face, questioning who allowed him to speak. While looking at his friend, he thinks that she shouldn't say anything more. The bullies continued beating him, and the protagonist's consciousness faded as Nami told them everything. Seeing this, she starts crying. The girl is being strangled while looking at her friend. Kisu's eyes then begin to close. The next day, in that same village, someone says that the fisherman Kisu took advantage of Nami's parents' absence, broke into her house, and killed her. His sentence is to be banished to the S-class dungeon Katarov. Devastated, the boy remembers that Nami was murdered. Dalda certainly killed her out of anger for the truth, and these crimes ended up being pinned on the boy. At this moment, the old man asks if the boy has any last words to say. He ends up declaring his innocence countless times. However, this was part of the false testimony given by Dalda and his friends. Moreover, the village chief, who is the bully's father, quickly silenced everyone. Having nothing else to do, the old man says he will carry out the sentence but show a little mercy. He orders the guards to cut the ropes binding his arms. Mocking the situation, Dalda says that it won't change anything and that he will die regardless. The blonde boy thinks that Dalda might be right and that it won't change anything since he won't come back alive. At that moment, the old man orders the guards to proceed and they push the boy. He ends up standing above some kind of pentagram. Relentlessly, it begins to glow. Crying, Kisuk declares that he hates them. He hates Dalda and his friends who killed Nami and the village leaders who presented false accusations without hearing a word from him. As he cries, he repeatedly says how much he hates all of them. Sometime later, the protagonist wakes up. He really is in that dungeon. Frightened, he wonders if this place truly is the S-class dungeon known as Katarov Dungeon. At that moment, he starts hearing a roar. Looking closely, he notices something coming. It is the A-rank armored bear. Seeing it coming toward him, the boy is completely terrified. Trembling, he remembers hearing about it from some adventurers. A monster that, if spotted, means you are as good as dead. Terrified, he begins to run from the monster. However, the bear is very fast and quickly catches up to him. It tries to hit the boy but misses, ending up breaking the ground instead. As the boy continues running, he says that he is going to die. Unable to take it anymore, he starts crying out for help. A shadow appears, asking if he really wants help now. Even though he is very scared, he starts saying yes and gently pleads for help. The shadow disappears, revealing itself to be a girl. Extending her hand, she tells the protagonist that she will grant him an ability. At that moment, a notification appears saying the ability Save and Restart has been acquired. After that, the shadow disappears. Kisuk wonders if this ability can do anything against the armored bear and also questions how to use it. Unconcerned with such things, the bear continues advancing. This time, it lands a strong punch on the boy's face. The blow is so strong that he goes flying, and with just that, he ends up dying. However, sometime later, he gets up. Terrified, he realizes that he didn't actually die. Looking at his hands, he says he had died and questions why he is still alive. As he tries to understand what just happened, the armored bear appears behind him. The monster seems furious with its target. Without hesitation, it lands another solid punch on his face. With this, the protagonist dies again. He wakes up frightened and then gets up. Realizing he has revived again, he is certain the armored bear had killed him before. Once more, the bear appears behind him and lands another punch, killing him yet again. Now he dies in the same way for the third consecutive time. This cycle repeats once more. The boy starts to understand that, in reality, he goes back in time every time he dies. This happens because of the ability given to him by that woman, the Save and Restart ability. He then wonders if he will be trapped in this cycle of death until the end of his miserable life. He wakes up for the 5th or 6th time thinking that he is going to die again. Only this time he ends up thinking faster and starts running. However, even though he escapes the bear, he still meets the same tragic end, dying by its hands. He will die no matter how much he dodges, left, right, up, or down. In the end, he continues to die every single time. Desperate, he declares that he doesn't want this and pleads for someone to kill him, for if he could die, he would be free from this suffering. However, his request is not granted and the boy wakes up once again. Soon he considers the possibility of erasing the Save and Restart ability to free himself from this. At that moment, a screen displaying his abilities opens. He can interact with everything on the screen, so he should be able to delete the Save and Restart ability. However, something catches the hero's attention. As soon as he touches the status window, memories flood his mind. Memories of Naomi, the assassin of Nami, and Dalga, the villagers who accused him. His anger is immense, and he wonders how it could disappear so easily. He concludes it's obvious that such anger wouldn't vanish. Then he charges at the bear to counterattack. Knowing what it will do, he manages to dodge the punch. At that moment, he realizes he moved toward the bear and grabbed it. However, if he dodges the first strike, the second one will hit him. And in this way, he dies once again. But he feels happy because he managed to avoid the first strike. He doesn't know for sure how many times he has died, probably over 100. By now, he has memorized the bear's movements. He knows that the armored bear first uses its right arm, so he ducks and advances forward. Afterward, it uses its left arm, so he stands and leaps upward to strike it. To dodge, the boy takes a step and rolls to the left. This way, he ends up behind the armored bear. However, he cannot panic and attempt to flee, as the monster will catch up and kill him if he does. Focused on defeating it, he dodges yet another strike. He tells himself this is the best approach he's found after dying countless times. Apparently, he manages to land a direct punch to the monster's face. However, his blow is weak. He knows he has 25 seconds to run before the bear catches up again. After running a certain distance, he stops, noticing rare chests scattered throughout the dungeon. At this moment, he hears the sound of the bear pursuing him, so he keeps running through areas he hadn't explored in his past lives. Suddenly, the ground gives way. He falls into a trap and finally dies in a new way. It took at least 200 attempts. After fighting the bear several more times, his movements improve significantly. Now the hero manages to aim for its eye, giving him 35 seconds to escape instead of 25. While running, he remembers the trap he fell into earlier. Realizing this is the only path, with no other way out, he notices the bear is already closing in. Unable to endure repeating this scenario any longer, he decides to jump. Incredibly, he avoids all the spikes on the ground. He breathes a sigh of relief as it was a close call. Then he looks up and starts laughing at the enraged bear. He can't recall how many times he died just to get past this spot. He enters the small tunnel ahead. Looking forward, he notices a light. Upon reaching the end of the tunnel, he is utterly surprised. It's a room with a chest at the center. It seems to be some sort of secret or rare chest. When he opens it, he finds a gem inside. He acquires this item, which turns out to be the Crystal of Wisdom, whose effect activates automatically. A vast list of abilities appears before the hero, ranging from S rank to C rank. Seeing this list, he is amazed by how incredible all the abilities are. The boy can choose any one of them, but there are so many options. At this moment, he begins to think about which one to pick. He decides not to choose healing magic or fire magic, as both require mana generation, which he currently lacks. Additionally, regarding swordsmanship and archery skills, it makes no sense to pick them without the respective weapons. As expected, he should choose an S-class ability. In this case, acceleration could help the boy climb higher. However, stealth could increase his chances of survival. Somewhat nervous, he decides to select the stealth ability. Thus, the stealth ability is acquired. Seeing his body shrouded in this type of magic, the hero becomes excited. At that moment, he notices the entrance closing. Additionally, several pentagrams in the area begin to glow. Suddenly, numerous bears identical to the first one appear. Judging by their expressions, they don't seem friendly. All the bears begin to grow agitated and roar. Seeing this massive number of enemies, the boy is already worried. He states that this is where the true Luke will begin, where he will die to countless bears. In this treasure room, he ended up being killed by a total of 10 bears. After that, he restarts. Bored, he realizes he's back at that same checkpoint. Even so, he manages to reach the treasure room again. After opening the chest, the list of abilities appears before him. Nervously, he decides which ability to choose this time. He uses acceleration. He charges at the bears but manages to dodge their attacks due to his speed. This is because he can see the bears moving in slow motion. After 200 deaths, he finally obtains the stealth ability. However, it is useless against these bears. In this case, he decides to pick acceleration again. Charging at one of the bears, he lands a precise punch. He's thrilled because he finally succeeded. However, looking at his hand, he notices it's already completely broken. Distracted by this, all the bears take the opportunity to attack him. As he gets beaten, he thinks that his body is still too weak to handle the power of acceleration. After being beaten by the 10 bears again, he wakes up. Looking ahead, he sees the same bear from before and realizes he's here once again. However, he's much more experienced now. If acceleration helps him dodge the bear's attacks, then he'll have plenty of opportunities to strike. He decides to pick the acceleration ability again and try to clear the room, but he ends up dying because he's distracted. The total number of deaths so far is around 225. When he reaches the treasure room, he realizes getting to this place is very difficult, and as he gets used to it, he adds more deaths to his count. After choosing one of the abilities, the monsters appear. Charging at one of them, he showcases his acceleration skills to begin the fight. However, he notices something coming his way. 3 bears start hitting him simultaneously while he wonders why it is working this way. Currently, the number of attempts is around 300. The bears have killed him many times since he picked acceleration and kept fighting. Then, he manages to use the speed to blind them, endure the pain, and strike again. Over time, he gets behind them and starts choking them all. In this case, Kisuke is afraid to admit one thing. Even though he has an S-rank ability, he's still not capable of defeating these bears. No matter what, even with the acceleration ability, he can't beat them. And this is the conclusion he reaches after dying 300 times. Lying on the ground, he understands he has to start all over again. Sometime later, the hero is back in the treasure room. He states that it's not easy to gather the courage to choose an ability because if he dies, he'll face the first bear again, and if he does nothing, he'll end up dying as well. Facing this inevitable fate, he concludes there is no escape. Then, he remembers Nami. But in his memories, Dalda also appears, the one who killed her. Recalling everything he went through in his first life, his expression changes as he declares that he hates this man, and that if it weren't for this hatred, he would have given up long ago. Choosing one of the abilities, he declares that he will escape this horrible dungeon and take his revenge with his own hands. After picking one of the abilities, the bears appear. Without fearing death, the hero charges at them. The boy has acquired martial arts, physical enhancement, and body improvement abilities, sequentially continuing to look for ways to defeat the bears. This way, he ended up dying many times, until the number of deaths reached 420. In this instance, the protagonist is on top of one of the bears. He thinks that muscle strengthening is definitely the best ability. Suddenly, the bear goes berserk. At that moment, the hero simply lets go. Doing a flip, he heads toward another bear. Declaring that this one is his target, he lands a strong kick on its head. The monster collapses to the ground, lifeless. The monster's death is confirmed and skill points are acquired. Smiling, the boy feels joyful because this was the first bear he killed. He now has 12 points available. The first ability is save and restart, and the second ability is physical strengthening. To level up the second ability, he needs 10 points. Determined, the hero knows what to do. His muscle strengthening increases to level 2. He thinks that if he keeps killing bears and leveling up, someday he will manage to defeat all of them. And to further improve his physical strengthening, he needs 100 points. Discovering this, the boy understands that for each bear he defeats, he will gain 12 points. To reach 100 points, he will need to defeat several bears. Discouraged, he declares that this is actually impossible, and that if he cannot level up, it will also be impossible to defeat all of them. Some time passes, and the hero has already died 510 times. Crying, he wonders why he has to go through this. It's always Daldo's fault, and because of him, he's stuck in this awful dungeon. Accidentally, the boy ends up activating the provocation skill. Disheartened, he says he doesn't even know how to use this skill, and he'll soon die again and have to prepare himself all over. Looking back, he already notices the bears are coming. Analyzing the situation, he understands that the only thing he can do is provoke his opponents, so he does, calling them idiots. He then wonders if this is how it's supposed to work. At that moment, one of the bears crashes into the wall. Looking at another, he calls it ugly. Irritated, the insulted bear ends up hitting its companion. These actions surprise the protagonist. Seeing two defeated bears in front of him, he starts laughing. He's laughing like a madman, then wonders if all his efforts were in vain. Regardless, the protagonist is filled with rage, so he decides that from now on, he'll use this skill to kill all of them. The bears then surround him. Provoking his opponents, he tells them to come and calls them little fish. All the bears start fighting each other. Meanwhile, the boy continues insulting them, calling them dumb and idiots. Some time passes, and nearly all of them are annihilated. He then notices that two remain. A bit annoyed, he tells them to attack simultaneously, calling them slow. Following the command, the bears charge. The boy barely manages to dodge, and they end up hitting each other. Since the armored bears are very strong, both die with a single blow. Covered in blood, the boy raises his hand high. He celebrates, saying he did it. The death count was 510, and that's how he managed to complete the armored bear's room. Sometime later, already in another area of the dungeon, the boy is running. After passing the room of the 10 armored bears, a kind of headless, flaming mule appeared at the exit. Frightened, he managed to hide and thinks he's on a new level, but it's still not enough. This monster has already killed him 10 times, going out to rank the headless mule. But the good news is that the respawn point was updated to the treasure room. He thinks that just the idea of not having to fight those bears anymore makes everything easier. After escaping the headless mule, he starts wandering through the dungeon and realizes he's never been here before. Ahead, he spots a room. Inside the mysterious room, there are teleportation circles. Seeing 3 in the room, he wonders if he has to choose one of them. Nervous, he tells himself not to worry about it. Quickly, he chooses the middle circle. Smiling, he thinks that if he regrets it, he just has to die and come back again. Shortly after, he is transported to another part of the dungeon. Looking around, he wonders if there's some place here, but for now, he decides to keep going. While wandering through the dungeon, he ends up finding a room. As he approaches, he realizes what it is. It's that woman who gave him the ability to come back to life, and she seems to be trapped in some sort of strange laboratory. Approaching, Kiska realizes it really is her. He wonders if, by chance, she's imprisoned. Terrified, he reaches his hand toward the container. The moment his fingers touch it, the glass shatters. In shock, the boy wonders if he really broke it with just one touch. With that, the woman falls to the ground. Desperate, the protagonist asks if she's okay. Confused, the girl gets up, answering that she is. With a faint smile, she asks if it was him who freed her. But the boy only asks if she was the one who gave him this ability. Introducing herself, she says her name is Ajat Tsubaki, a former heroine who was sealed in this place. Then the girl asks the protagonist his name, and he responds that it's Kiska. Recovered, the girl says it's a nice name. Then she asks him to come closer, and he does. Suddenly, she kisses him without any ceremony. Surprised, the protagonist asks why she did that. Smiling, the girl replies that she wanted to thank him and asks if, by chance, he didn't like it. Embarrassed, the hero says he's not saying he didn't like it. Completely confused, he wonders what this girl wants. She then approaches him again, asking if he wants to leave the dungeon. Nervously, the hero replies that he wants to get out of this place. Seeing this, she smiles and grabs his wrist. She states that he must follow her because she will get him out of there. After that, they find themselves face to face with the headless mule, and he struggles to defeat it without any trouble. Seeing this, Kiska thinks she's incredible, and the girl asks if she's strong. In response, the hero comments that she is very strong. The ex-heroine then uses some sort of magic with her left hand. Curious, Kiska asks what she just did. The girl replies that it's a skill called Item Box, which allows her to store anything. Excited, the hero recalls that this skill was probably in the skill chest. After picking up the magic stone, she says they must move on. The boy then asks where they are going. She replies that they are heading to the intermediate boss room of the dungeon. Shocked, the protagonist asks if they'll have to fight him. The girl explains that if they don't defeat this monster, they won't be able to leave. She explains that if he hadn't freed her, she would have remained trapped for much longer. Because of this good deed by the protagonist, Ajita states that she will fight for him. Seeing this, the boy feels somewhat moved. He affirms that he is alive thanks to her, so it must be mutual. As they open the door, the girl comments that it might be true. This is the dungeon boss she was referring to, an S-rank monster called the Golem. Impressed, the protagonist comments that it's enormous, probably around 10 meters tall. At that moment, the monster begins to roar. The ex-heroine tells Kiska to stay behind her and reassures him that it'll be fine. Charging forward, she promises to protect him. She lands a sword strike on the monster, but it quickly prepares to counterattack. Surprisingly, Aegea is very agile and manages to dodge. Watching this fight, the boy thinks she's very strong since she hasn't taken a single step back against this golem. He tells himself that she has a chance to win. Unexpectedly, the girl trips over a rock. The monster's fist approaches her face. As she is struck, she is thrown far away. At that moment, the girl is somewhat dazed as the monster prepares to finish her off. Kiska intervenes using his provocation skill, calling the boss an idiot and saying he's right there. Hearing this, the ex-heroine becomes worried, telling the hero not to do that. Irritated, the monster prepares to punch the boy in the face. It does so, landing a blow strong enough to break the wall. Seeing this, the ex-heroine herself can't believe it, left in shock. With a trembling voice, she begins calling out to Kiska. Almost crying, she says she told him she would protect him. From the rubble of the wall, the boy begins laughing, saying that, unfortunately, he's very good at dodging and has only been avoiding the bear's attacks repeatedly. Tearing up, the boy smiles, revealing that Kiska is alive. He then calls out to her, pointing out that the monster's arm is stuck. Understanding the command, the girl charges forward to finish it off. She heads toward the boss using the side of a sword style technique. With that single attack, she slices the boss in half. At that moment, it's clear that the ex-heroine is truly powerful. After witnessing this immense display of strength, the protagonist feels somewhat embarrassed yet happy at the same time. Aegea then runs toward him, calling his name. Hugging him, she says they did it. Realizing this, he sees that they have defeated the golem boss, and by the looks of it, everything will finally be okay. At least that's what he thought at that moment. After defeating the golem, they pass through a secret passage and advance further into the dungeon. At that moment, after the scare, the girl calls out to Kiska. She informs him that there's a safe place nearby. After entering through the secret passage, they come across a strange type of room. It's some kind of fully equipped space or bedroom. Aegea comments that perhaps vampires noticed a place like this. Frightened, a protagonist asks if vampires really exist here. Explaining, Aegea says that the scholar vampires are the demons who made this dungeon their fortress. Hearing this, the boy asks if she's sure it's safe to stay here and wonders if the vampire will get angry about it. In response, she says they're probably safe. Lying on the bed, the girl smiles, saying she's very tired and they should rest. Kiska, on the other hand, thinks this is a very bad idea, but because he trusts Aegea, he believes it will be fine. Embarrassed, the girl calls his attention, asking him to come over for a moment. This request leaves him completely confused. Aegea then explains that she wants to talk to him right now. The two sit on the bed. Breaking the silence, Kiska asks Aegea if she finds him disgusting. Not understanding, she asks why he thinks that. Responding, he says it's because of his silver hair. Surprisingly, the girl explains that to her it looks beautiful. Being kind, she says there's something incredibly lovely about the hero's silver hair, which leaves him feeling a bit awkward. This hair is characteristic of the hated Zhao race. Because of this, everyone who sees his silver hair looks at him with disdain. At that moment, he remembers Nami, as she was someone who genuinely admired his silver hair as it was. In fact, Nami was the first to compliment his hair, and Aegea is the second. Looking up, Aegea says that she must think so because she's someone from another world. This information greatly surprises the boy, who thinks she's really saying she came from another world, though he's never heard of such a thing. Aegea then asks if he doesn't believe her. However, Kiska says that's not it, and that he does believe her. In response, the girl simply smiles and then rests on his shoulder. She says she knew he would say that. Smiling, the boy thinks that perhaps this strange sense of distance is because she's from another world. Completely breaking the mood, the silver-haired boy's stomach growls. Cheerfully, she asks Kiska if he's hungry. Responding, he says he hasn't eaten anything decent since entering the dungeon. Suddenly, Aegea says she has headless mule meat in her inventory box. With a smile, she comments that she'll test her cooking skills by preparing a meal for the hero. Patiently, the boy waits for his dinner. Some time passes and Aegea finishes cooking, apologizing for the delay. The food the girl brings looks very good. She suggests the protagonist eat. Curious, he decides to try it. Putting a spoonful in his mouth, he says it's delicious. This makes the girl very happy. Food in the dungeon is scarce, and the protagonist usually can't make anything sophisticated. However, it seems there were some spices in the item box, which the girl used to create delicious dishes. Emotional, he thinks that since entering the dungeon, this is the first time he's eaten something good. He wonders how the food could not be delicious. Surprised, Aegea asks if he's crying and if perhaps she used too much spice. Awkwardly, he replies that it's just a little. After dinner, the hero says he's tired and will go to sleep. Looking ahead, he notices there's only one bed, so he tells the girl he'll sleep on the couch and she can take the bed. While washing the dishes, the former heroine tells him not to worry and that it's unnecessary. Smiling, she says they can sleep together. This leaves the protagonist quite flustered, saying it's not a good idea. Later that night, both end up sleeping separately, with Aegea on the bed and Kiska on the couch. However, the hero still can't fall asleep. He thinks that with Aegea's help, perhaps he can escape this dungeon. He admits it's embarrassing to rely solely on a woman's strength, as his power is nothing compared to hers. While reflecting on what he should do, the former heroine approaches. With a suspicious smile, she tells the hero she wants to engage in carnal relations with him. This shocks him, and he asks what she's doing. Without responding, the former heroine simply kisses the protagonist. Taking his hand, she calls his name, telling him to touch her. At that moment, the girl asks if his heart is beating fast. Looking into his eyes, she says she loves him. She begins repeating this declaration over and over. Scared, Kiska says he hasn't done anything for her to fall in love with him, which leaves her totally confused. Aja explains that he saved her. She reveals that she had been trapped in the depths of the dungeon for hundreds of years, waiting alone, hoping a prince would come to rescue her. So whenever she encountered someone in the dungeon, she would grant them abilities. At this, the boy realizes that the former heroine gave him an ability to save her. Continuing her explanation, the girl says it was futile, because those with that ability would become enthusiastic, but fail halfway through. In other words, Kiska was the only one who managed to reach her. Getting closer to his face, the girl says she was always waiting for him and calls him her Prince Charming. Hearing this declaration, Kiska is left speechless. Summoning her courage, Ajia begins to undress. However, the protagonist tells her to wait and stop. He explains that he can't do this with her. She then asks why. A bit hesitant, the protagonist explains that he's dating someone else. The former heroine says she understands but moves closer, placing her hands on the hero's shoulders. On top of him, she explains that it doesn't matter. With a haunting expression, she says she'll be happy even if she's the second, as long as he loves her. After saying this, she kisses him. Traumatized by everything that has happened in his life, the protagonist begins to recall all the bad things that happened to Namia. As she kisses him, the boy starts trembling. Frightened, Kiska pushes Ajiha away, but he quickly realizes what he just did. With a trembling voice, he apologizes and asks if she's okay. The hero believed himself to be a repulsive existence, and Ajia's aggressive actions reminded him of the people who hurt Namia. A bit embarrassed, the girl apologizes, saying she might have been too forward. After that, she goes to her bed and lies down to sleep. A little regretful, Kiska remembers that he pushed her unintentionally. In his mind, he acknowledges that he should have found a better way to act. And although it's uncomfortable, it's difficult to escape the dungeon without any help. As he's about to sleep, he thinks he must find a way to make her change her mind tomorrow. Sometime later, he wakes up. He gets up, still somewhat groggy, and looks to the side. At that moment, he notices Ajiha in front of him, levitating as if she were some kind of supernatural spirit. Seeing this scene, he begins trembling and sweating nervously. In reality, she was hanging, and you know what that means. Overwhelmed after seeing this, the boy begins to feel nauseated. Trembling, he questions whether this is his fault. His body shakes from head to toe. Holding his head with his hands, he wonders if this happened because he rejected Ajiha. As he struggles, he states that he can't understand what's happening. Desperate, he starts running away, saying it's not his fault. Not knowing what to do, he enters the same passage as before. As he passes through, he insists that this was, in fact, an accident. Exiting the passage, he is spotted by those flaming headless mules. One of them charges at the hero and kicks him in the back. Close to death, he thinks that he got this far thanks to that heroine, and now that she's gone, he'll be killed easily. Sometime later, he wakes up. He realizes that he reset during a bear attack. Nervous, he remembers that Ajiha died because of him. As he leaves the room, he wonders what he should do. He questions whether he should have accepted her love. Seeming conflicted, he understands that she is no longer alive. Unlike Ajiha herself, who is still alive because he went back in time. He hurries to touch the glass and declares that this time he will accept her love. Just like before, the glass shatters with a single touch. As he looks at the stunned girl on the floor, he thinks that he will save her. Confused, she asks who the boy is. Smiling, he responds that his name is Kiska. Observing the hero, she claims she has never heard of him. But she says that, in any case, she felt something bad coming from him. Confused, the protagonist wonders what is happening and thinks that this girl in front of him doesn't look like Ajiha. He even asks if it's really her, and the girl says yes, and that she understands. With a serious expression, she says she's never heard that before. At this, the protagonist wonders whether it's a good idea to tell her that he knows her from another timeline, and she's the same person who gave him the save and restart ability. He starts questioning what happened the last time he acted against her. Ajiha, with a nervous tone, says that she's going too far and that he's not her enemy. But quickly, the girl begins choking him. With a manic expression, as she holds the boy by the neck, she asks if this is why she feels something bad coming from him. He tries to make her stop, but he doesn't have enough strength. Completely changing her demeanor, Aja tells him to listen closely. She explains that you must not make the mistake of thinking that everything will return to normal when he dies. She says that even in death, his actions are imprinted on his soul. Terrified, he starts asking who she is. With a sadistic smile, she explains that she won't tell someone as wicked as him who she truly is. Kiska then begs to speak with Ajiha immediately. But the ex-heroine responds that she doesn't want to, and Aja doesn't want to talk to him now. As she stares at him, the boy with a piercing gaze begins to offer her advice. He suggests that he should never get involved with Ajiha again. After saying this, she ends up snapping the boy's neck. After dying in such a tragic way, he wakes up once again at that checkpoint. Nervously, he starts affirming to himself that he can't understand what's happening. He wonders what that was and also questions whether it might be some kind of second personality. Soon he recalls the girl's advice to never get involved with Ajiha again. He understands that if he meets her again, he will die, and if that happens, it will be the end for him. Thus, he decides not to meet her again or break her seal. However, it will be very difficult for him to reach the end of the dungeon without Eijia's help. In this case, he'll have to find another way to do it. Now the pentagram assault, Kiska recalls stepping on the middle portal before and decides to step on the left one this time. As he does so, he begins to be teleported to another location. Looking around, he realizes that there seems to be only one path, just like the place where Eijia was. Having little to fear, he starts exploring the new area. Then he comes across a girl sitting alone, calmly drinking tea. Seeing this, the protagonist is extremely surprised. Opening her eyes, the girl says this is unusual and that she can't believe someone managed to enter this place. However, the hero remains in shock, unable to believe there's a girl drinking tea so calmly in this infernal dungeon. He begins to wonder who this girl is and what she's doing here. At that moment, she breaks his thoughts by asking what he wants and if, by chance, he needs something from her. Awkwardly, Kiska explains that he's trying to find a way out of this dungeon. Smiling, the girl says she understands. Suddenly, she says that it's a great disrespect. This leaves him confused, but she explains that she's the great ancestor of vampires. With a sadistic look, she says she doubts he knows what that means since he doesn't look like a scholar. Using her sharp nail, she cuts her own arm. Then she approaches the protagonist and delivers a deadly blow. He starts screaming in agony. Falling to the ground, he only hears the girl saying he must pay with his life. The last thing he sees before dying is the sadistic smile of the insane girl. After this death, he wakes up again at the checkpoint in the bear room. He realizes he has been killed once more. Terrified, he affirms to himself that this dungeon is full of crazy people. Kiska remembers that Eijia once told him some demons turned these dungeons into fortresses. He realizes it was one of those monsters that killed him, this one being the vampire ancestor named Yudito. This girl dresses elegantly, like a little lady. The protagonist thinks he's no match for someone so dangerous, who attacks suddenly. At that moment, he leaves the bear room, pondering what to do. While running, he states that he has only one option left. That option is the third circle, the one he hasn't tried yet. Standing before this new circle, he thinks it must be the right one. After stepping onto the circle, he's transported to the third location. Walking while observing his surroundings, he notes that it resembles the previous corridors and hopes there's no one dangerous ahead. At that moment, he spots something at the end of the corridor. Approaching, he realizes it's a sword. Looking at the sword, he thinks it seems suspicious. However, the boy came to this place unarmed, and if this sword is powerful, it could help him escape. He declares that he'll give it a try and picks up the sword. The moment he does, he notices something strange. Incessantly, the boy is struck by an intense electric shock. While holding the sword, he feels a searing pain throughout his body. He says he can't even open the hand gripping the sword, and the pain lasts for several minutes. The pain is so intense that over time, he loses consciousness. Sometime later, he wakes up, and as he stands, he realizes he's still alive. However, looking to the side, he sees that the sword has reconstructed his arm. It seems to be fused to his arm as if it's some kind of symbiosis. He wonders what kind of thing this is as his hand appears to have merged with the sword. As he moves his arm, he notices that the sword is also very heavy. Terrified, he wonders what to do with this. With no other choice, he continues walking through the dungeon corridors, the sword still attached to his arm. Kiska manages to walk, but he can't even lift the arm holding the sword due to its weight. Suddenly, he spots a monster ahead. The terrifying monster is an A-rank werewolf. Upon spotting its target, the werewolf begins to howl. Sweating nervously, the boy thinks this is impossible and that he's going to die again. Then, and unexpectedly, the sword moves him toward the monster. It attacks the werewolf with multiple fatal blows. In mere seconds, the werewolf is completely defeated. Driving himself forward, Kiska wonders what just happened. It feels as if his sword has a life of its own because it started moving on its own. Swallowing hard from the shock, he assures himself that in any case, this is fine. Smiling, he says he'll use anything to escape this dungeon, even a sinister and repulsive sword. Sometime later, he defeats several Ankaya wolves. As he continues walking through the dungeon, he thinks this black sword is really powerful, and with it, he can defeat any enemy in his way. Along the way, he comes across a gate. Given the circumstances, he thinks this must be the intermediate boss room. He recalls the golem from last time when he was with Eijia and wonders if it will be the same this time. Without a second thought, the boy enters the room. This time, the monster is an S-rank creature called a griffin. Nervously, the protagonist realizes that this is indeed the intermediate boss here, and it looks very strong. Without hesitation, the S-rank monster charges at the boy, who manages to dodge, narrowly escaping death thanks to the sword's ability. After dodging, he strikes a heroic pose. Confidently, he declares that now he has this black sword. The griffin charges again, but the boy defends himself with the sword once more. After blocking multiple attacks from the monster, he dodges again. He understands that the only thing he can do now is to move forward. He decides not to interfere with the movements of the black sword. At that moment, the boy simply waits for the S-rank monster to approach. Landing a fatal blow on the griffin, he declares that after all this, he might just win. After defeating the boss, the boy begins to smile. Once the boss is defeated, a small door opens, and he remembers it was the same thing that happened with the golem when it was defeated. As he walks through this passage, he declares that he will use this sword to escape this dungeon in no time. Some time passes, and the boy seems very tired as the sword consumes more and more of his body. He wonders if, somehow, the sword has grown even larger. While walking through the corridors, he spots someone ahead of him. It's the vampire Yudito, who remarks that it seems he has grown quite a bit. Surprised, the boy asks why she's here. They stand face to face, staring at each other in the corridor. Frightened, the protagonist asks what she wants, while the girl laughs and asks if his body is still conscious. Yudito says that if he asks her, he knows what will happen, and that the answer is clear. With a sadistic smile, she declares that this is the boy's death. She plans to subdue the parasitic sword attached to his arm. He says he doesn't understand what she means by parasitic sword. The girl explains that the sword he wields is the puppet master parasitic sword. She elaborates that it grows by parasitizing people and consuming demons, making it an extremely dangerous object. She thought it would be fine to leave it alone since this dungeon is rarely visited. Nervously, the boy asks if she's going to kill him, to which she responds affirmatively. Tearing off her own arm, she praises the boy, saying he catches on quickly. Shocked, the hero watches as she rips off her own arm and wonders what she's going to do. Holding her severed arm, the girl continues smiling without showing any pain. With her own blood, she forms another arm and a sword. Then she tells him to do her the favor of dying now. Without giving him a chance to respond, the girl charges at the protagonist. However, he manages to defend himself with the parasitic sword. Irritated, the vampire insists that he must die. The two continue their sword fight as the boy vows he won't lose. Quickly, the vampire creates some distance between them. Smiling, she says that after all, it won't be so simple when it comes to the parasitic sword that has grown this much. Excited, the hero wonders if this is his opportunity. Suddenly, the vampire throws her armed sword into the air. At that moment, she uses a skill called Crimson Torrential Rain. Suddenly, the sword shatters and several shards are launched at the hero. He is struck by many of the sword fragments. As she looks at the completely defeated protagonist, Yudo says she didn't want to use this technique because it means she won't be able to use her left arm for some time. However, she says there was no other option. When he wakes up, the boy realizes he has reset once again. Frustrated, he questions whether this is the right choice. Reflecting, he understands the significant risks and decides to put the situation into perspective. Using the first transport circle, he plans to find Aegea sealed away, and if he breaks the seal, he will be immediately killed by her. However, by using the second circle, he will be killed by the vampire without being able to do anything. Using the third circle, he obtains the parasitic sword and ventures deeper into the dungeon. Yet, at the end of it all, Yudito, the vampire, will appear and kill him again. Nervous, he thinks that if he wants to live as long as possible, he will have to take the third option. Thus, his goal becomes to defeat the vampire Yudito with the help of the cursed sword and cross the dungeon. But even knowing this, he has no idea what to do to achieve such a result. He recalls when the vampire said that the sword grows parasitically on its wielder, feeding on demons and being an extremely dangerous object. Without leaving the room, the boy understands that he'll need to kill enough demons to push the sword to its limit. Only then will he be able to defeat Yudito. The dungeon itself warns that this is a race against time before Yudito appears. Panting after running so much, he realizes it must be about 5 hours before she appears again. Facing a transition circle, he remembers that the last time he passed through a magical circle, Yudito was waiting. Standing on the circle and being teleported, he hopes she isn't there anymore. Looking at the end of the corridor, he sees that she's no longer in the previous spot. Smiling, he says that in this case, he'll keep moving forward. However, turning to the side, he notices something strange. It's a group of werewolves gathered together. At that moment, the monsters notice the hero's presence and he begins laughing, thanking them. Rushing toward the monsters, he declares that he'll destroy all of them. Meanwhile, Yudito is calmly walking through the corridors. Upon finding the dead wolves on the ground, she remarks that someone has clearly been feeding quite a lot. Looking at the hero, she comments that the marionette wielder has grown considerably as well and that this time defeating him will be difficult. However, as she observes him, she notices something strange. Half of Kiska's body is already consumed by the parasitic sword. The boy then asks who's speaking. Smiling, the vampire says it seems the original consciousness of his body is already gone. Still confused, the hero asks what she's talking about, but the vampire simply rips off his arm, stating that it doesn't change the fact she'll kill him now. Smiling, she adds that she'll do him the favor of ending his life. Sometime later, the protagonist is once again at the previous checkpoint, having been killed by the vampire. Terrified, the boy tells himself that he can't defeat Yudito, even with the marionette sword. Despite this, he doesn't give up and tries several more times, coming close to victory on occasion. However, in those instances, the sword ends up fully taking over his consciousness. Demoralized, the boy says there's no point in abandoning the dungeon in this state, and that all 3 routes he chose led to the same result, everyone losing control. Suddenly, the protagonist has an idea. He recalls that he needs to try something. Determined, he says that while it didn't work before, he must attempt it now. Having died so many times, he claims there's no place for cowardice in the face of death. In the pentagram room, he selects one of the circles, saying it's a slim chance. Sometime later, he finds himself face to face with the vampire Yudito, who remarks that this is rare. Holding her tea, the girl comments that she didn't know the intruder had entered this place and asks what he wants. At that moment, the girl recalls that last time was similar as she accused him of being disrespectful and ended up killing him. Faced with this, he decides to change his approach completely and kneels before her. Addressing her as the great ancestral vampire Yudo-sama, he explains that he has a request. In her mind, the girl realizes she needs to act more respectfully, which surprises the vampire. On his knees, Kiska politely asks the vampire if she would make him her disciple. Seeing this, the girl seems somewhat bored. However, in less than a second, her expression changes entirely to a terrifying smile, and she remarks that what he just said is quite amusing. Surprised, the hero realizes this was the best decision and that now he might have a way to survive. However, Yubino asks what benefit she would gain from making him her disciple. At that moment, Kiska struggles to think of what to say. Excitedly, he explains that if he becomes her disciple, he'll be her right hand and do whatever she wishes. Surprisingly, the vampire finds this boring. She says that it's so disgusting she'll ask him to die, swiftly landing a fatal blow on him. At the usual checkpoint, the protagonist realizes he has died once again. However, he feels excited because it was definitely worth it, and this might be the correct path. He understands that to conquer this dungeon, he needs to be stronger than he currently is, and to achieve that goal, he decides to become Yudito's apprentice. After all, she's a merciful vampire and not one of those monsters incapable of speech. At that moment, he realizes that to become her disciple, he must consider the benefits he can offer. He understands that if he can provide something valuable to Yudito, he might have a chance to become her apprentice. Sometime later, the hero is once again kneeling before the vampire. Curious, she asks what she would gain from this arrangement. The hero then says that Yudito must have been in the dungeon for a very long time and confidently suggests that she must feel lonely. He explains that he could be someone she could talk to. However, the vampire explains that, in truth, feeling lonely isn't that bad. At that moment, she prepares to grab his arm, which frightens the hero. Desperate, the boy begs her to wait a minute, saying he has more to offer. Seeing that she stops, he feels relief to still be alive. Continuing the conversation, the girl explains that she may not look it, but she has many years of hard work under her belt and full confidence in her strength. Smiling, she explains that she can handle all the heavy lifting, especially when it comes to building a new hideout. Lifting a heavy table with one hand, the vampire points out that, in terms of strength, she believes she's far superior to the boy. Still on his knees, he admits that she's right. Already bored, the vampire asks if he has anything else to say. While staring at her, the protagonist thinks about what he could offer Yubito, but comes up empty. His body trembles, waiting for death, but suddenly, he stands up. He reveals to the girl that, in truth, he just wants to leave this dungeon alive. He explains that he was born in the city of Katarov, where this dungeon is located, and has spent his entire life being hunted. He also reveals that the only woman he ever loved was killed by vile people. Shaking, he says he was blamed for her death and ended up being exiled to this dungeon. Showing no interest in this sad story, Yudito questions what any of that has to do with her. With a piercing gaze, the protagonist declares that he wants revenge on the entire village. He reveals that he wants to torture and kill them in the most horrific ways possible and ensure that every last one of them dies. He concludes by telling the vampire that what he can offer her is, in fact, a spectacular massacre. Hearing this, the girl is shocked, but then quickly starts smiling sadistically. Blushing, the vampire says that sounds very entertaining. She admits that she's starting to feel curious about what will happen. This makes the hero very happy, but she interrupts him, saying it's too soon to celebrate. Looking behind her, she explains that if he can pass a test, you will be allowed to become her disciple. While looking down the corridor, she asks if he used the auto-transport circle to arrive at the dungeon, and he confirms that he did. Yudito then explains that this dungeon has something special. Once someone steps into the auto-transport circle, they can't return via the same route. Sometime later, they arrive at a dead end, and the hero realizes this is the room where he was transported. At that moment, the girl presses some kind of hidden brick. She explains that with just one secret trick, it's possible to choose alternate routes. Seeing this, the hero is surprised as he didn't know there was a hidden passage in this location. Again, they reach another dead end, and she presses another hidden mechanism. A door opens, and the hero realizes this is the marionette sword chamber. Yudito explains that this sword has an unpleasant property, and she has always wanted to get rid of it but can't even touch it because it's parasitic. Nervously, the protagonist asks what she wants him to do. In response, the vampire says she wants him to defeat the sword's parasite and take control of it. If he can do that, he will pass the test. In shock, Kiska asks if he will be able to do it, and the vampire tells him that out of 10 people who try, 9 fail. However, she also explains that he has no other choice. If he refuses, he'll end up dying. Trembling with fear, the protagonist accepts the offer. Yudito then explains the proper way to do it. He must grab the tip of the sword, not the hilt, and pull it out all at once. Terrified, the hero manages to grab the sword by the blade. With his body trembling from the weight of the sword, he asks the vampire what he should do now, and she replies that he must swallow it. She explains that he needs to place the tip of the sword in his mouth while looking up, pushing it all the way down his throat. The hero thinks that if he doesn't do it, she'll kill him anyway. At that moment, he complies with the vampire's order. As he swallows the marionette sword, he wonders if he's going to die. Suddenly, he wakes up in some kind of reality that seems to belong to the sword's territory. The sword's energy, seeing the boy, asks if he wants to be its master. Frightened, he still wonders what this thing in front of him is, and it replies that it is the main body of the marionette sword. Kiska understands that this is the true form of the marionette and wonders where he is. Responding, the sword says it assumes this place is the deepest part of him. Changing the subject, Kiska calls on the marionette sword, saying he needs its power. Without arguing, the spirit agrees, surprising Kiska. He questions if it's that easy, unsure, and the spirit simply replies that it's an amusing answer. It explains that the boy was the one who initiated this. Surprised, the hero says he thought it would refuse, but it says otherwise. It reveals that there's something nostalgic in the boy's soul, making it believe he could continue. At that moment, it turns its back to him. Sometime later, he wakes up. The marionette's voice calls him master, saying it's a pleasure. Laughing, the vampire remarks that she didn't think he could actually survive. In this case, the marionette circuits were successfully controlled. Yurito then tells the boy that he passed the test, and then it's a pleasure to serve him. Kneeling on the ground, she says she's under his command. And so he became the vampire, Yurito's disciple. From that day forward, a strange life began by her side. The boy managed to become Yurito's disciple and spends the night in the room where he and Eijiro once stayed during one of his past lives. Each hideout has only one bed, which is why they had to sleep in separate rooms. Sometime later, the hero enters Yurito-sama's room. However, he's startled to see some suspicious clothing on the table. At that moment, the vampire wakes up and greets the hero, noting that he's arrived quite early. Stammering, the master bows, wishing her a good morning while thinking to himself how captivating she truly is. Sitting on the bed, Yurito informs him that she'll begin training him as her apprentice and asks if he's ready. Kiska replies that he's ready and will endure any training. The boy then says to wait there while he changes his clothes. Sometime later, both are walking through the corridor and the vampire asks the hero what skills he has. The master replies that he only has one, called provocation. At this, the vampire comments that it's a bit odd. Nervously, the boy thinks he actually has two skills, provocation and save and restart, but decides it's better to keep the latter a secret. They stop at a specific spot in the corridor and the girl activates a kind of secret passage. Kiska is impressed that there really is a secret passage, and Yurito explains that she has memorized the entire dungeon map, having lived there for 1,000 years. Impressed, the hero thinks it's incredible to have lived here for 1,000 years and believes he made the right choice becoming her disciple. At that moment, they open another hidden cell in the dungeon, stating that their current objective is to acquire some skills. Yurito explains that she knows how to modify all the dungeon treasures, impressing the hero. Opening the chest, it's revealed that the boy has obtained the wisdom crystal, which activates automatically. A complete list appears before him and the system asks him to choose one skill from all the available options. The protagonist notices it's similar to the list he saw before, but some skills are different as he doesn't recall seeing tremor and discernment previously. Calling for his master, Kiska asks Yurito which one he should choose. The girl explains that swordsmanship is the only one that caught her attention, but since the parasite is inside him, he'll be able to manipulate it at will. Thus, she suggests he choose the swordsmanship skill. Following her suggestion, he selects it and is notified that he has acquired the swordsmanship skill. Excited, he thinks that now he can use the marionette sword freely. However, his master calls his attention, saying they must now go to the deepest part of the dungeon to obtain the next skill. Hearing this, the boy is shocked, but his master doesn't care, saying they must go immediately. Sometime later, both are walking through the dungeon's corridors. While wandering, Kiska notices that this is the deepest part and that they got here through secret passages, encountering very few enemies. However, he tells himself that he still has a bad feeling. The vampire announces that they've arrived and now they're in front of a treasure chest, similar to Annie's. The boy realizes that this is the skill chest, and the vampire tells Kiska that this is a test of luck. She explains that the wisdom crystal in this chest allows him to obtain only one skill at each rank, chosen randomly. She adds that the hero's luck will now be put to the test. Hesitant, Kiska opens the chest, saying it had better grant him a good skill. At that moment, the protagonist is notified that he has obtained the attribute allocation skill. His master seems confused, wondering what that means. Yurito explains that it's an uncommon skill, but without magic abilities, it won't be very useful. At that moment, the boy thinks that, in summary, this was a major failure. A bit awkwardly, the vampire explains that all he needs to do is acquire a magic skill in the future and asks him not to feel discouraged. Turning away, she tells him to return to the hideout. But at that moment, the protagonist asks about the son and the master. Curious, he inquires about what lies behind that door. She responds that it's a room where the dungeon boss resides and defeating it would allow him to leave the dungeon. This piques the hero's interest greatly. Nervously, he asks if this means that if he defeats the boss, he can leave the dungeon, and the girl confirms it. As he stares at the door, he thinks he has finally found a way to escape this dungeon. Kiska asks his master if she could defeat the boss easily, but the girl explains that the boss of this place is SS a rank. She also mentions that she has been in this dungeon since the current boss arrived and hasn't been able to leave in 50 years. In other words, even Yurito couldn't defeat this dungeon's boss. Yudito concludes that to escape, someone must be stronger than her, and they would also need additional help to defeat the boss. Smiling, she says that to achieve this, they must return to the boy's training. Excited, he runs after her, saying they should continue. Sometime later in the dungeon, she cuts her arm and explains that this is how she controls the blood in her body. Looking at her arm, the protagonist thinks he already knew this since she killed him in his past lives. At that moment, the boy observes her blood transform into a dagger, realizing she can manipulate it into anything, depending on the amount. Yudito explains to the protagonist that he can use his marionette sword in the same way by concentrating on his body. With clean hands, he begins focusing his thoughts. Suddenly, the sword appears in his hands, and he is notified that he has acquired the marionette mastery skill, along with the derived skill of Black Sword. Excited, he tells his master that he did it, and smiling, she says that at least now he should be ready to fight. Overjoyed, he thinks he can finally fight, but his master calls his attention. Yudito tells Kiska that she will give him his first mission and explains that she wants him to fight her. If he manages to hit her with his sword even once, he will complete the mission. With a trembling voice, he asks if this is really okay, but the vampire says he should imagine that she wouldn't want to kill her own disciple. Awkwardly, her apprentice says he just doesn't want to hurt her. Hearing this, the vampire becomes furious. Deeply irritated, she says it's fine, and as he can see, she has the ability to heal herself. With a manic smile, wielding her dagger, she asks if he really thinks he can hurt her. At that moment, the hero wonders if he made Yudito angry. Charging at the protagonist, she tells him that if he thinks he can, he should prove it. At that moment, the boy manages to dodge her strike but ends up with his back to his opponent. Once again, he narrowly avoids another attack. The same believes that Yudito was eager to practice a little, but something tells him he ended up stepping on her toes, and with a frightening expression, his master says that merely dodging is not enough to complete the mission. Once again, as the attack comes from above, the boy manages to block it using his cursed sword, but the vampire's strength is on another level and quickly throws him away. He says he understands that, thanks to his fencing skills, he can dodge. However, he knows she is an excellent fighter and can even wield a large sword with one hand, and that if he happens to land a hit, it will be something remarkable. Because even though it's just training, if she keeps attacking like this, she might end up killing him. While defending himself, he thinks it's necessary to attack her as quickly as possible to end this fight. He concludes that, if necessary, he will keep dodging until he finds the right moment to strike. He does just that, attempting to hit her with his sword, but she quickly evades. Impressed, he realizes it's useless, that if she continues to dodge like this, he won't be able to achieve his goal at all. At that moment, he remembers that when she killed him before, she had a large sword and thus couldn't move carelessly. However, in this reality, she is using a dagger, and at that moment, the girl charges at him again. As he sees his master approaching, he thinks that if it's just a dagger, he might have a chance to hit her. He quickly raises his sword to defend against his master's strike, while thinking he will manage to attack her. He affirms to himself that this time her attack won't make him retreat, so he must counterattack with his sword, aiming precisely at her head to strike her. However, the vampire narrowly dodges, but in doing so, her arm ends up being hit. Seeing this, the protagonist is both surprised and nervous because he finally succeeded. But realizing he actually hit his master, he starts to apologize in a trembling voice. He approaches her, asking if she's okay, and the girl questions who he thinks she is. Smiling, she says that this little scratch is nothing. Then Kiska remembers that she once even tore off her own arm. Congratulating her apprentice, the girl says he completed his first mission. Bowing, he thanks his master and says he is finally getting stronger, partly thanks to the puppeteer and his fencing skills. Happy, he realizes that becoming a jujitsu disciple of the Sama was the right choice, and at that moment, his master calls him. Surprised, she says that the way the boy fought and his movements were very ordinary, so she asks if by any chance he has any combat skills. Awkwardly, he recalls everything he has been through so far and answers that he doesn't have many skills, really. Even more impressed, the vampire says that if that's the case, he must have a lot of talent, while the boy thinks the truth is that he actually has combat experience. Sometime later, the hero is in his cell facing those flaming headless mules. At that moment, he begins to think about this place. Confident, he says he can get through using the secret passage his master taught him. In this case, he will face the flaming headless mules, as his master warned that today would be practical training. Quickly, these monsters launch a type of flaming sword toward the hero, who, using his cursed sword, manages to defend against all the strikes simultaneously. However, the vampire throws just the dagger toward the hero, who manages to block it. Yudito tells the boy that he needs to keep his arms more tense, and that when fighting multiple enemies, he should also make his movements more compact. So his apprentice says he will do just that and prepares to continue the fight. Focused, he thinks about keeping his arms more tense and fighting more compactly, just as she said. Quickly, he manages to block all the flaming swords thrown at him with more ease. Happy with the result, he says he managed to defend against all the attacks, and at that moment, his master orders him to attack the monsters. She explains that the mules are out of mana, and with his new sword, they are nothing more than mere chunks of meat. With a passionate smile, the girl says he knows that now and for this reason should attack them, and so the hero obeys. Quickly, he moves toward these headless mules. Reasoning, he understands that he must first advance and after that attack the mule on his left, and he does so without difficulty. After that, he already knows he needs to attack the other mule on his right, and with a single strike, he manages to defeat it. Then he realizes that after defeating 2 headless mules, a third is trying to escape, but the boy manages to catch up to it and, in this way, kills it with just 1 sword strike. In the background, his master seems happy after watching her apprentice's performance. Smiling, she congratulates Kiska on the result, and he thanks her. However, the protagonist says that if it weren't for the girl's help, he might not be alive today. Yurito comments that if he were to die in a place like this, it would take her decades to be able to leave again, and even she wouldn't know how long it would take. She then says she will make him stronger, and for that reason, he should be a bit more confident. Upon hearing this, the apprentice bows, shouting that he will do his best. At that moment, the system notifies that the subjugation of monsters has been confirmed and that points are being acquired. Seeing this, the vampire remarks that it seems the boy has already earned some skill points, so she suggests he starts using them, which he does. Opening a status screen in front of him, Kiska sees that he has finally managed to occupy all 5 skill slots, leaving him emotional. Looking at the list, he sees that he currently has 15 points available for use. He feels stronger due to his fencing and puppeteer skills and understands that if he had to choose between all his skills, he would end up selecting these 2. But he soon realizes that he needs 30 more points for fencing and 70 more for puppeteer, so in the background, his master asks how he is doing. Kiska approaches her, saying that he would like to improve his fencing level, and for that, is thinking of saving up 30 points. Yurito says that's a good choice. Leaving the room, she says that's it for today and comments that they should head back home now. Sometime later, both are at home and the vampire seems impatient about something. Breaking the silence, she asks Kiska if he's finished, and he replies that he has and will bring it now. Smiling, he approaches his master, apologizing for the delay. In this moment, the boy recalls that his job has always been to prepare tea for his master since he became her disciple. This tea is prepared with the blood of monsters. After tasting the tea, the vampire says it's very good, while the hero thinks about how she enjoys drinking monster blood from a teacup. The hero has never wanted to drink monster blood, but seeing the vampire doing it makes him think it must be good. Interrupting his thoughts, Yurito asks about dinner, and Kiska explains that it's almost ready. Sometime later, he brings dinner to his master's table, thanking her for her patience and explains that it's a headless mule steak. Disheartened, Yurito says it's the same thing as yesterday. Awkwardly, the hero explains that he can't do much about it since they don't have many supplies. But he says he defeated some wriggling trees and managed to make a salad, though the vampire reveals she doesn't like salad much because it doesn't taste good. Kiska tells the girl that if she doesn't eat vegetables, she will become malnourished, and the girl explains that she's a vampire, so she doesn't need nutrients. Leaving her, the hero asks her to wait a little while. Sometime later, he returns with some dungeon fruits. This excites the vampire, and her apprentice says he found them behind the dryad while gathering some leaves and decided to pick them. Smiling, he comments that he was thinking of leaving them for a few days before harvesting them and that they could be used for something later, but he changed his mind because today is a special day. Then the 2 start eating. Breaking the silence, the hero says that if he had more provisions, he could make something much better. The vampire then says that if she could leave this dungeon, she could gather more provisions. Curious, the hero says she mentioned before that she used to leave the dungeon, so he asks if that's true. Yurito says yes, and that she used to do it a lot before because dungeons are more suitable for vampires since they're not exposed to sunlight. Starting to understand, the boy says that after that, a new boss arrived, and now she is prevented from leaving the place. However, the vampire says that might be one of the reasons, but it's not the only one, which leaves her apprentice confused. The girl explains that some time ago, there was a room separate from the bosses, and it used to have a teleportation circle that allowed people to enter and exit the dungeon. Shocked, Kiska says he didn't know something like that existed. A bit dejected, Yurito comments that she was the only one who knew about it, but one day someone appeared and destroyed it. She concludes that's what stopped her from leaving the dungeon again. Surprised, the hero asks if she has any idea who did it, but she says she doesn't know anyone who could have done it. However, someone remembers something and says there might be a person. They explain that the people who seal Ajiha in this place might be the ones responsible for destroying the circle. Hearing about Ajiha, the hero is shocked, feeling a chill down his spine. Yurito continues, saying they broke the teleportation circle to ensure that girl couldn't escape the dungeon. Breaking the silence, the apprentice asks the vampire if she knows Ajiha, and she says of course she does. She comments that Ajiha was a remarkable person. She reveals that it was the heroine Ajiha who defeated the Demon King, and this information surprises the hero once again. Also alarmed, the boy thinks this is strange because the story he heard is different. In a famous tale, it is said that the Demon King was killed by a warrior named Elysium, known as a great hero. So he wonders if it was actually Ajiha who did it. Wanting to know more about the former heroine, he asks the vampire if Ajiha was sealed in the dungeon, and she says she doesn't know the details. She then tells Kiska that she needs to warn him about something. With a serious expression, she says he must never try to break Ajiha's seal, no matter the reason or circumstances. She explains that Aegea may have been the one who defeated the Demon King and is strong enough to destroy the world, and she can't even imagine what would happen if someone broke her seal. Nervous, the protagonist says he understands while thinking that in one of his past lives, he ended up breaking her seal, and he only hopes this won't cause him any future problems. Suddenly, the hero asks Yurito if he can ask her a question, and she allows it. Kiska asks if she ate the fruits he was going to eat, but she denies it. Awkwardly, the hero explains that he couldn't eat any fruit, but the vampire keeps insisting she didn't eat them. Changing the subject, she says it's time to go to bed, while the protagonist thinks this feels like a master-slave relationship. After that, the boy and the girl prepare to face the villain, who is angry. In a single motion with the sword, he attacks. His training with Yurito continued for several months, and his skills improved along with his ability points. His swordsman skill was also enhanced. Happy, the protagonist tells Yurito that his swordsman skill leveled up. Smiling, the girl responds that at this rate, she believes the day they will escape the dungeon is drawing closer. Excited, the protagonist agrees. Clenching his fists confidently, he says he will become strong enough to take her out of there. She laughs awkwardly and says he's getting better at this. With his hand behind his head, the protagonist feels embarrassed. Then he says he's going to skin the monster, and she responds with an okay. The girl says she'll go ahead and return to the hideout while Kiska finishes his task. Raising his hand near the monster, he summons his sword. Right after, he thinks that skinning monsters is a disciple's job, and thus he finishes the monster. Returning to the hideout with the remains of the body, the silver-haired boy announces that he's back. However, he accidentally sees Yurito without any clothes. Immediately, he is startled and drops his bag on the ground. She covers what needs to be covered, but he is frantic. Overly embarrassed, the protagonist apologizes and runs off. Suddenly, his friend calls out to him, yelling. Worried, he thinks she's angry. Still undressed, she laughs at him and says his reaction is very amusing, and suspiciously, she says she knew. Sweating nervously, he doesn't know what to say. Sometime later, he finishes dinner and finally wraps up his work for the day. The protagonist informs Yurito that he has washed the dishes, then heads to bed. With a sweet look, she calls Kiska. Embarrassed yet irresistible, the girl asks if Kiska would like to sleep with her. Shocked by the question, he swallows hard. Frozen, the boy asks why she asked this so suddenly, and if there's a reason. Looking to the side with flushed cheeks, she says there's no reason. Not believing her own lie, she continues, saying she just didn't want to sleep alone that night. He is speechless, and then responds that if that's all, he'll sleep in his own room. She insists, even though she's very shy, saying the boy is being meaner than usual. The protagonist finds her words very cute, and if he doesn't do what she asks, he'll feel guilty for the rest of his life. So he says he understands her and that they'll sleep together tonight. She shows a genuinely happy expression. Yurito lies down, and shortly after, he joins her. Both have silly smiles on their faces. Looking at the boy's face, she thinks that if they're going to sleep together, then there's nothing wrong with saying this. Thus, she starts the conversation, calling Kiska. He responds to her call and looks at her, and she continues speaking. It seems like such a long time since the day they met. Happy to remember, the boy agrees, recalling that when they first met, he only thought of how scary she was. And now they are sleeping together, which feels strange. Thinking about this, he calls Yurito and asks if, at the beginning, she wanted to kill him. Worried, she asks if he knew. Calmly, he looks upward, lets out a laugh, and feels certain she thinks he can see right through her. But the protagonist only knows this because she had killed him many times before. Yurito apologizes and, embarrassed, says that the only people she ever met tried to kill her as soon as they saw her. That's why she was always on guard. The boy responds that he isn't like that and doesn't hate her, even though she had killed him many times. Whether she likes it or not, he is who he is because of her. That's why he's grateful and has no reason to resent her. She climbs on top of him and comes close to his face, saying she's relieved to hear that he doesn't hate her. Kiska becomes embarrassed by her proximity. Holding his face, she leans in closer and asks what he thought when he saw her without clothes. The protagonist blushes and doesn't know what to say. Smiling sweetly, she says he can be honest with her. So he admits that she looked very beautiful. Not satisfied, the vampire asks what else he thought. He repeats that she looked beautiful. The girl insists further, and he says that besides that, she looked cute. However, she says he must have thought of something else. Finally, the protagonist admits that she looked erotic. Embarrassed, she says he's a pervert. Kiska is mortified as he didn't expect her to call him that. The silver-haired boy insists that she shouldn't tease him like that. Yurito finds it amusing and apologizes. She adjusts herself and finally asks him what he would do if she showed her naked body again. The protagonist is startled by the question, and looking into her eyes, he remembers that in a situation like this, no matter what he does, he can't help but think of the two women who were important to him. After what happened with Mamiya, the boy needs to resist, but if he rejects her, something like Aegea might happen again. He sits up and calls Yurito to talk in a somewhat sad tone. Not understanding, she asks what happened, now showing a concerned expression. Kiska says he doesn't think his life is so bad right now. A smile returns to the vampire's face, and she replies that she feels the same. He continues, saying it's frightening. Confused, she asks why. He replies that it's because if he continues living this comfortable life, he's afraid his entire vengeful spirit will disappear. When those bears kept killing him, he cursed his own fate. But now he's strong enough to defeat the monsters and even has a cute girl by his side. The protagonist cannot accept continuing to live such a life, so he calls for Yudito. The boy says that he loves her but apologizes because he's not ready yet. She lowers her head and says she understands. Then she kisses him passionately. Kiska thinks he loves her, but to move forward, he needs to resolve many things. Hopeful, she asks him to continue their relationship after he has taken his revenge. He feels very happy to see that she understands his side. As she's about to say something, a silhouette appears behind her. Suddenly, Aja appears and cuts off her head with a sword. As her head falls, the vampire finishes, saying that she loves him. He cannot believe what his eyes are seeing. Yudito's heavy body falls on him. The heroine coldly asks why he couldn't choose her, but could choose this type of girl. With a macabre look, she tells him not to play with her. The boy goes back in time and hopes that she might remember him. When he meets her at the end of the hallway, the protagonist calls for her. While drinking tea, she says it's strange because she never imagined an intruder would get this far. He feels discouraged, but had already guessed she had forgotten him. However, he doesn't lose hope. So he introduces himself as Kiska and asks if she remembers him. Perhaps his name will spark her memory. The vampire repeats his name, but unfortunately, she has no memory of knowing someone like him. The boy's ground collapses, leaving him in total devastation. It feels useless, and he senses he is about to lose his mind. The boy starts crying desperately. He will have to redo everything from the beginning. Shocked by his reaction, Yudo asks if the man's okay. He accepts what he must do, as he has done it countless times with his heart broken. He kneels and says he has a request for her. The girl looks startled by his behavior. Kiska insists that she accept him as a disciple. They will have to start all over again, unfortunately. The vampire is surprised by his request. Once again, he will have to become Yudito's disciple, and they will need to escape this dungeon together. Even though he knows her, she might kill him again. But even so, he will return to the same place as many times as necessary. Suddenly, he looks at her face and she is no longer there. The protagonist suffers again upon seeing his woman dead. The blue-haired girl reappears and reminds him that she warned him in the past. She charges at the boy, declaring that if he gets involved with another woman, she will not forgive him. She strikes in a way that her sword pierces his throat. Time resets again. Tired and traumatized, he cannot approach Yudito, and if he does, both of them will be killed. The silver-haired one laments everything he learned with Yudito, the structure of the dungeon and its hidden pathways, the location of treasure chests, sword fighting techniques, and how to control the parasitic sword. Perhaps the boy no longer has a relationship with her, but what she taught him remains with him. The man walks down the corridor once more, affirming that he will escape this dungeon alone. In his thoughts, he thanks Yudito. The wisdom and experience she gave him will be used to get out of this dungeon. He reaches the sword. Tense, he grabs the puppet's sword, holding it by the blade rather than the hilt. In one motion, he swallows the blade. The boy becomes paralyzed, and within himself, the curse appears. Kiska greets him again and wonders why this keeps happening. He feels as if they have met before. He said something similar to the last time. Nervously, he asks Kiska to do something for him, begging him to lend his power. The sword considers what it should do, but if it is like before, it should have agreed immediately. Concerned, Kiska asks what the problem is. The sword has its own objectives and wants to know if obeying the boy will help achieve them. Confused, the boy asks what kind of goal a monster could have. It's a simple goal: to become human. The protagonist is shocked, since it feeds on humans like a parasite. Taking full control of the body would prevent it from doing so. Thus, if it controlled his body, it couldn't become human. The shadow isn't sure because it has controlled many humans, but never attempted to become one. Surprisingly, obeying the boy might bring it closer to becoming human. Frightened, the boy asks if it will lend its power. The shadow confirms that he is correct. The protagonist becomes excited, and the shadow says that for some reason, obeying him seems like its destiny. It will faithfully do as he commands. He successfully controls the puppet. The skill lord of the parasitic puppet sword is obtained along with the derived skill Black Sword. Now with the sword in hand and confident, he can fight again. Kiska moves forward as the next objective is the ability. He manages to acquire another swordsmanship skill and sets his sights on the next goal, the Crystal of Wisdom. However, the chest is unfortunately in front of the boss's room. This means it will take some time to reach it, not to mention the danger. Last time he gained the granite attribute to eventually have a chance to use it. It's pointless to go there now. What matters most now is his current strength. He will only hunt monsters he can handle and level up his swordsmanship. Confident, he proceeds with the plan and runs toward his objective. The protagonist goes into battle and kills all his enemies. This way, more skill points are acquired enough to level up. He cleared everything, and it will take a while for them to respawn. In that case, he should head to the werewolf's nest now, but he cannot because Yudito has already been there before, and he absolutely must not encounter her. The two are not close in this life, so if she sees him, there is a chance he will be killed. Even so, if they happen to get close. As a negative spirit, Ajio will likely come to kill them. The entire dungeon belongs to Yudito, and somehow the protagonist will need to avoid her and keep hunting monsters. Worried about what to do, the sword comments that he seems troubled. The protagonist is startled because he didn't know the puppet sword could speak. The sword says it thought it would take a little longer to develop the ability to talk, but it must be because the two are compatible. It could be the accumulation of their relationship as user and tool. This resulted in the puppet sword gaining the ability to speak. The sword asks what is bothering its master. Nervously, he replies that he wants to acquire many skill points and asks if the sword knows any way to do that. The sword says there are some ahead but warns that at the protagonist's current level, he would only die. Accustomed to this, he decides he will face them anyway. And so, they head to the Knight's Hall. Kiska stands before 3 soldiers in golden armor. He heard they were stronger than werewolves. The boy notices there are 20 of them in front of him. Then he remembers the black sword he carries. One of the soldiers tries to attack him with its sword, but Kiska defends himself. Others charge forward, but the boy manages to fend them off with the strength of his sword. He feels happy with the result. Kiska recalls that the werewolves didn't have weapons. However, his enemies now are heavily armed. The boy gathers his courage and decides to face them. He taunts them, calling them weaklings. Several soldiers try to attack him with their swords, but Kiska ducks to evade them. The black sword comments that it wasn't a bad move. The boy rises and strikes 2 soldiers. He reveals that whether he likes it or not, he is confident in group battles. The boy thinks that, although this fighting style is effective, it isn't ideal for earning skill points. Fortunately, in terms of reducing enemies, it is indeed effective. Kiska calls out to the soldiers again, urging them to fight him. This time, he is caught off guard by an attack from all sides. Several swords approach his body. The weapons begin to wound him, and he realizes this isn't good. While being attacked, the boy notices that he must have been carried away. The scene changes, and suddenly he is alone. The protagonist smiles and says he is back in this place again and feels a bit nostalgic. First, he was killed by werewolves, then by the soldiers in golden armor. The boy realizes he has died hundreds of times. At that moment, he rises with hope in his eyes. He understands that no matter how many times he dies, he will always start over. Kiska presses a brick on the wall and asks if his master didn't know about the hidden passage. His master reveals that he doesn't know much, and the boy agrees. Kiska recalls his last moments in the battle with the soldiers in golden armor. The boy tried to fight the soldiers again and perished the same way as before. However, no matter how many times he dies, he will always have to restart. Restarting again from the beginning, Kiska hadn't expected things to end like this. He remembers his peaceful days when he was just living with Yudito. The protagonist approaches the black sword. He observes it with amazement and asks it to give him all its strength. The sword takes on a strange form and reveals that it is an honor to meet its master. Kiska doesn't understand what just happened. The black form asks if something is wrong. The boy says there's nothing wrong, he just noticed the appearance is a little more human than he expected. The creature reveals it didn't know it looked like this. However, lately its appearance has been changing. The protagonist notices that every time he sees the black sword, it looks more human. He considers that it might escape the save and restart cycle. Kiska asks if this isn't good for the sword since it dreamed of being human. The creature is startled and asks how he knew about that dream. The two look at each other surprised. The protagonist says he can understand someone's ambitions just by looking at them. The creature is astonished and reveals it wants to work with Kiska because he is such a great person. Suddenly, the boy notices a change in the environment. Circles appear on the ground, and from them emerge the soldiers in golden armor. Kiska is confident because he has been through a lot. He might have been their first opponent, but he has been killed by them many times. The boy reveals that no matter how formidable they are, Kiska will always win in the end. Kiska declares that he will win this time, and his sword notices his confidence. The soldiers prepare to attack. The protagonist taunts them, calling them to fight. His enemies advance to attack, but Kiska already knows his opponent. He waits, counting to 3. At the end of the countdown, he dodges one of the strikes. The boy notices this caused friendly fire. At that moment, Kiska knows he needs to keep dodging, so they attack each other. He raises his blade and delivers a downward strike. By doing this, the boy earns skill points. The black sword is amazed by its master's abilities. The protagonist says he understands them. Kiska notices that while he's talking to his talking sword, the soldiers are targeting his back. He turns, lowering his center of gravity. And with a quick strike, the boy wounds another of his enemies. Now 2 have been defeated. Kiska realizes everything is going according to his plan. The protagonist reveals he can handle this. Decapitating another soldier, the boy realizes that's the 4th one. A notification shows he has earned more points. Kiska looks at his screen and notices the SP of the monsters here is 10 times higher than in other places. They are on an entirely different level. Defending against 4 of them, the protagonist earned 416 SP. He leveled up his swordsmanship skill, as well as his master parasitic sword skill. The sword also gained the pulsing sword skill. Kiska encourages his sword, now happy with its new abilities. The protagonist activates the sword's new function, making it larger and more powerful. Soon he feels the weight in his hands is familiar, and his sword asks why that is. Some soldiers are still attacking him. Angry, they approach the boy. The sword seems to be merging with the protagonist's arm. Kiska lets the sword's autonomous function take over, defeating another soldier who falls lifeless to the ground. He then realizes the sword's parasitism can actually fight for him. The sword praises its master's performance and he returns the compliment. The boy launches another soldier's head far away. He's beginning to see victory, and then he remembers the stupid reason he died last time. Only a few soldiers remain. The boy is confident when something suddenly surprises him. All the soldiers turn and bow to someone who just entered. Kiska kneels and his sword says it didn't mention this. It explains that the man who arrived on horseback is the boss of this place. He is an SS level monster, and Kiska fears what he sees. Kiska asks his sword if they have a chance to defend themselves. It reveals it all depends on the master, and that its previous master ended up dead. Despite being nervous, the protagonist says this will go better than with its last master. The sword encourages him, saying teamwork isn't just for show. The protagonist, having fought many battles using puppet techniques, won't lose to any ordinary enemy. He uses his sword to block an attack. Kiska notices the soldiers haven't left the path. He'll need to clear them out with a single strike. He prepares the puppet technique with his sword and delivers numerous strikes in all directions. In the blink of an eye, all the soldiers are dead. The black sword is amazed at its master's performance. It recognizes it did very well, even though it was the first time using that technique. But Kiska knows he's used it before. The protagonist hears the sound of a horse's hooves. He knows there's only one enemy left to kill. Only the knight remains. At that moment, the enemy charges at Kiska with his spear. The boy, in turn, uses his sword as a shield. The enemy's strength pushes Kiska backward. He realizes the knight is incredibly strong. He turns to his sword, asking if it can help him. It says it will try. Suddenly, the black sword rises, pulling its master up with it. One of the first strikes is made, but the enemy counters with his spear. Kiska manages to defend himself and raises his sword again to strike the soldier. He realizes his opponent is very skilled as he's struggling to deal damage. Thinking this way, the protagonist believes he might lose. The knight attacks again with Kiska only defending himself. He escapes the situation with the help of the black sword. He reveals that he can't avoid it and needs to use that technique. His loyal weapon warns him that it could kill him. The protagonist smiles ironically. He raises his sword and says he's used to dying. Then he plants his sword on the ground to gain momentum. He jumps, holding his sword, and thinks that if he can't damage the soldier because of the spear, he'll need to destroy it. Kiska uses the puppet technique with his sword, creating a massive attack wheel. The protagonist aims directly at the soldier's spear and ends up slicing him in half. When he lands on the ground, the boy appears happy for his victory. He earns more skill points. The black sword praises its master and reveals that it can reach level 3 with this. Kiska opens his screen at this moment. He realizes he already has enough points to level up his sword. He decides to use his points to upgrade his weapon. The black sword feels that a change is happening. Suddenly, it turns into a ferocious predator. Its master is startled by its new form. However, the creature seems pleased and says this is what it always sought. The boy questions what it can do now that it is no longer in sword form. It reveals that it can eat. Without further explanation, it devours its master. And with this, it can finally become human. Kiska dies again and starts from scratch. He laments his failure once more. He reveals that he never noticed that his sword's goal was, in the end, to defeat him. In that case, he considers stopping the use of his weapon for his plans. He wonders if he should try stealing swords from his enemies. The protagonist thinks this won't work since he needs his sword's autonomous functions. He supposes there's something familiar about its scent. Perhaps it's the compatibility between the two. Kiska becomes angry that his own sword betrayed him. The protagonist suddenly gets up and starts walking. He encounters the creature that would become his sword, and he believes it also has its own plans. The black sword says it is an honor to meet him. After reaching the point where the black sword asks to evolve again, Kiska denies his weapon's request. Desperate, it says it would be more powerful at level 3. The protagonist says he already understands his weapon's true purpose. The black sword gives up and asks how its master knows everything. The boy questions if it wasn't planning to hide the secret for a while longer. Kiska thinks he might abandon his sword now and take one from his enemies that was left behind. The black sword calls out to its master. But before he responds, it positions itself near his neck, asking if he really thinks he's smarter than it. The protagonist fears it is using its autonomous functions. The sword says it will let its master choose. It asks if he prefers to die now or be devoured by the predator later. Kiska knows both options are terrible for him. He calls his sword a puppet and asks to negotiate. The weapon seems to like the idea. Kiska says it would make sense for him to die if the sword wants to become human. The sword says, in its view, it would be better if he chose the predator to devour him. The protagonist, desperate, asks if he really needs to be devoured. The weapon replies that it doesn't necessarily need to be its master. Any strong human would solve the problem. Curious, the sword asks if its master can find a strong human for it. As soon as its master agrees, it returns to the ground. The sword urges its master to hurry. Otherwise, he will be the one devoured. Kiska, still recovering from the shock, says he understands. The boy thinks that logically the one to be sacrificed should be Ajia. He doesn't have good memories of her since she killed him several times. If the protagonist catches her when the barriers break, he will have a chance to kill her. On the other hand, Aja is a heroine who saved the world. Despite causing Kiska to suffer, she is someone the world needs. This would mean Yudito would be the victim. He cannot entertain this possibility. Even though their relationship ended, he still feels grateful to her. He remembers that Yudito is also terrible and could attack if necessary. Kiska looks at the symbols on the ground and takes a step forward. He remembers the heroine who saved the world and the vampire feared by the people. Suddenly, a light engulfs him. The boy wonders which of them must die. Inside a capsule appears a Jiha, and at that moment, the boy knows it is her who must die. The black sword says there is a barrier and cannot eat. Kiska reveals he can easily break the barrier. His weapon then asks him to do it. Hesitant, the protagonist reveals that ever since he started saving and restarting his life, he has lost his sense of worth. He no longer feels anything about his own death. So what would he feel about the death of others? Suddenly, the protagonist shows a worried expression. He doesn't know if he can really kill Aja. The black sword urges him on. Kiska thinks there's still a possibility that Aja might kill him in the future. Therefore, this is something that must be done. The boy begins to feel sick. He feels the worst doing this. Kiska remembers all the times Aja told him she loved him. He simply cannot kill someone who said they love him. Crying, the protagonist asks the weapon to just cut off his head. He can't do it. The sword reveals there's no other way to do it. In the end, he gives up devouring him. Kiska is surprised and asks if the weapon really won't kill him. It asks if that's what he wants, but the hero ends up denying it. Then the sword says that when it saw its master, it realized that its master's thoughts were like those of a human. The boy thanks his sword. The weapon tells him to stop because it's weird. The protagonist says he'll find a way to turn the sword into a human. His weapon seems to like the idea. In a scene change, the sword praises the place they are in. Kiska says they should rest for the rest of the day, and together, they must decide how to proceed. The boy remembers that this place holds bad memories of Aja taking her own life, but also the happy times he spent with Yudito. And since Yudito never used this place, it's the best for the two of them to rest. Kiska asks his sword if there's another way for it to become human without devouring people. It responds that there isn't. His master thought it could become human by being a parasite and hunting monsters. The sword reveals that it thought so too. However, deep down, it knew it could only become human by devouring them. But to devour someone, it needs to reach level 3. And the previous masters ended up dying before reaching that stage. The weapon explains that depending on others became too risky. That's why it started being a parasite to have control over itself. Even so, it never reached the level of a predator. Kiska is surprised by its performance. The black sword says that even it is surprised. There was no one capable of using it better than Kiska. The protagonist is happy and understands that this must be one of the reasons why the sword let him live. The black sword asks why its master ended up in the Katarov dungeon. The boy tries to remember and looks at the sword. He thinks he'll have to tell her everything. After the long story, the sword comments that its master has been through a lot. Kiska says that no one in the village would side with him. They still hate him to this day. His weapon suggests that it devour everyone in the village. The boy is surprised by the idea. That would be his revenge and the sword's dream aligned. He holds his sword and happily asks if it can devour them all. It reveals that it would be very easy. Kiska holds his sword with courage. He believes the two of them can do it. He tells his weapon not to leave anyone behind. In that case, they'll start the next day. The two head to the dungeon. Kiska points his sword at a giant hawk. They will move forward until they escape from there. With just one strike, the protagonist eliminates one of his enemies. The weapon is impressed with its master. He reveals that even S-rank bosses won't be a match for them. Now that they've come this far, the only target left is the dungeon's exit door. Kiska moves toward the door when Yudito appears in front of him. She was wondering why the sword wasn't in its usual place. The girl looks at him with sarcasm and asks what's going on there. Kiska is surprised to see her. Yudito raises her arms with fury in her eyes. She begins to activate her power, saying that apparently Kiska is carrying a dangerous weapon. A wave of power surges from her hands, and the girl says she will kill anyone who possesses the parasitic sword. Kiska thinks this is bad. Suddenly, the black sword says it has detected danger coming from her. The protagonist knows that very well. They're so close to escaping the dungeon now. Then he wonders if fighting Yudito is necessary, and she asks if he's ready. The girl charges at him, holding two swords. Before she attacks, Kiska shows an expression of pain. The boy kneels, asking her to wait. Yudito shows a confused look. The sword asks what its master is doing and comments that they can defeat her. However, Kiska covers its mouth. He asks the sword to leave the situation to him. Then he asks if she is the vampire craving Yudito. The girl comments that at least he has some manners. The protagonist bows before her and asks if she will allow them to pass. Yudito says the sword he carries is very dangerous and must be destroyed to avoid causing problems later. Kiska says she doesn't need to worry about that. He reveals that he is in control of the sword and can manage it. The vampire appears surprised. She never imagined that anyone could control the sword. Kiska explains that someone taught him how to do it, but he knows it was Yudito's knowledge that helped him. At this, the master comments that he doesn't seem to be lying and finally lets them pass. the protagonist begins to thank her. He feels relieved that he doesn't need to fight her. As they walk past the vampire, the Black Sword comments that she is a very arrogant woman. The protagonist worries about this. Kiska reacts quickly and defends himself against an attack from Yudito. She says the sword has no manners. Both the boy and the sword fear the girl. They start running away from her. Panting, Kiska reveals that they managed to find a way to escape. The Black Sword can't stop laughing. It finds what just happened very amusing. In this case, it was good they escaped since no one knows what could have happened. The Black Sword asks if her master is upset, and he replies that he is, a little. At this, the weapon comments that they could have handled the girl. Kiska thinks this might be true, but even so, she is not someone he wants to fight. The sword asks why. Then the hero tries to explain but remembers this isn't something he can simply talk about. The sword says it must be because he likes girls like her. The protagonist tries to deny it, but his weapon notices he is blushing. At that moment, the boy stands up and asks the sword to stop teasing him. She asks if the two of them are leaving already, and Kiska confirms. Now they just need to move forward. He is sure he will defeat the dungeon boss. The two enter a corridor. The Black Sword says this is her first time in this place. The protagonist is standing before a chest. His weapon asks what's inside. He replies that it contains a crystal of wisdom that can grant abilities. Kiska opens the chest to take a chance on the power. A powerful crystal appears inside the chest. A screen informs them that the effect will activate automatically. The next screen informs them that the acquired ability is appreciation. The protagonist seems confused. The boy remembers this ability on his list, but is rank D, practically useless. Kiska decides to try using his new ability, but it is blocked due to his very low level. The boy opens his screen. He notices he has enough points to level up his sword. Kiska will also level up his provocation and appreciation skills. Once again, he decides to try using his new ability. Kiska raises his hand and invokes the new power, and suddenly, his black sword takes on a sharper form. The protagonist now understands. At this level, increasing levels is pointless. The sword asks what he was complaining about earlier. He reveals that he tried using his new ability to appreciate his sword, but it only gave him useless information. The sword complains about him admiring her beauty without her permission. The boy asks if she is a beautiful girl. He orders her to stop joking around. His weapon grumbles and says she will show him when she actually becomes a girl. Kiska feels curious to know what kind of human his sword will become. The protagonist says he is ready now that he has leveled up. He looks at the dungeon exit door. Then he confidently walks toward it. The boy stops a few steps in front of it and observes it seriously. His sword wonders if her master is nervous, and he confirms it. Then his weapon thinks she can't help it and ends up singing a battle cry for her master. Kiska is startled and asks what happened. The sword says she was just cheering for him. The protagonist laughs at the situation. His sword says he's mocking her, but the boy denies it. Kiska smiles and thanks his sword. She questions the formality of the situation. The boy comments that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't have come this far. The dungeon doors open. The hero now finds himself in a new corridor, and the door is behind him close. The sword says he should save his gratitude for later. A creature approaches Kiska. Now is when the real challenge begins. The protagonist confirms and prepares his battle stance. The creature before him looks like a massive insect. It is a giant rank SS centipede. She moves in to attack Kiska. He realizes this is the final battle of the dungeon. Kiska takes an attack stance. He recites the name of his new ability, Appreciation. An information screen shows that the centipede's venom can even dissolve metal. The protagonist thinks this will be difficult. The centipede's jaws open wide. Kiska is startled but manages to dodge in time. The creature's venom hits the wall instead. He knows he'll die if he gets hit by that. So he activates the pulsating mode of his sword. The powers of the Black Sword are activated. Now with its autonomous powers, Kiska is able to dodge the venom. The boy dodges one of the jets. Kiska propels himself and leaps with his sword. This is the moment to strike. His sword collides with the monster's shell. However, he doesn't understand why his sword can't cut through it. He keeps forcing his powerful weapon, but he ends up being struck hard by the centipede. He crashes into the wall. The protagonist barely gets up before the monster charges at him again. At that moment, the sword's autonomous abilities make him dodge the attack. The creature, however, strikes again. It sends him crashing forcefully to the ground. The Black Sword asks if its master is okay. The boy then gets up. He is not completely fine. His weapon asks what they should do. Kiska reveals they can't avoid this. In the end, his sword agrees. They have no choice but to use that. The boy leaps and uses the puppet technique with his sword. He then repeats his wheel-shaped attack. He pleads for the attack to work, but his strike is interrupted by the creature's thick shell. The protagonist is taken by surprise. He falls to the ground. The giant centipede prepares to attack him again. Kiska realizes that none of his attacks are working against his current opponent. The sword suggests they move and search for a weak spot to attack. The hero understands and lets the sword's autonomous powers guide him. He wonders where exactly he should strike. However, his sword moves toward one of the creature's legs. The boy attempts to attack the animal's legs. Still, it's unsuccessful. Kiska thinks the animal's eyes might be a weak spot. His attempt to pierce them is blocked by one of the creature's claws. After pushing his sword back, it also pushes the protagonist and sends him flying. Severely injured, the boy thinks this isn't going to work this time. It was still too early to challenge the giant centipede. He considers silently accepting his death. Even after Kiska dies, time will rewind. The centipede's claw moves closer to his face, but the sword, acting on its own, defends its master. He's surprised and stands up. His weapon asks why he's giving up. The protagonist is too scared to answer. His weapon reminds him of the promise he made to turn it into a human. Kiska remembers this is true. He is standing because of his talking sword. Even though he can read you things, the sword he knows now won't be the same one he meets later. Therefore, the promise he made with his sword can only be fulfilled in this life. Kiska apologizes for wearing his sword. He then takes an attack stance, saying that now it's going to get serious. There must be some vulnerable point on the centipede. The sword uses its autonomous powers and tries to attack one of the creature's legs. Angrily, the centipede opens its mouth to devour the boy. Fortunately, the boy manages to dodge. Suddenly, he has an idea. He communicates it to his sword, saying he thinks he found the weak spot. In response, the sword encourages him. However, Kiska reveals they'll have to die for it. The sword accepts, as it's for the sake of the battle. Kiska smiles and thanks his companion. He uses his provocation ability, injuring the centipede and making it charge at him. The creature's enormous mouth opens wide. The boy recites his puppet-style sword technique, Swift Dragon. He then charges into the creature's mouth. He ends up entering its body and cutting it with his sword. The centipede screams in pain. Kiska knows that with a cut this deep, he can pierce even its shell. The boy encourages his sword, and it agrees. With a powerful strike, Kiska manages to break out of the centipede. He leaves it gravely wounded, and he lands on the ground. A screen shows that he has killed the monster and gained more points. Afterward, the protagonist can hardly believe what he has done. The sword comments that they should celebrate defeating the final boss. Then the protagonist realizes how much trouble he had. He faced many challenges, but now he has finally conquered the Katarov dungeon.